Hey everyone, welcome back to Singer Family Adventures. We are really glad to have you here. This is going to be a very different video than most of my videos. I hope that those of you that are part of my Disney YouTuber Ohana sort of family community will watch this, and I hope that you don't mind a change of pace for once. I think it's time to talk some about race and race in America. And I've been thinking about doing this video for the past couple weeks, and I'm nervous about it, honestly, because I'm a very political person. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I am an activist on several topics, on and off, more off lately, but done activism a lot in my life. And Disney is my escape from all of that. It's my escape from politics and the stress of the world. And our channel is about 70-75% Disney, and it's sort of our happy zone. So what I'm talking about now is not happy stuff. It's hard stuff to talk about race in America right now. And yet, at a certain point, I feel like I can't stay silent. It's too important. There's too much happening. So I'm going to talk about issues of race from three different perspectives, or three different things here. And, you know, I'm a white woman, obviously, sitting here talking to you about race in America. I'm glad if you're listening to me. I am not the most important person to listen to. We should be listening to Black people right now. We should be listening to people of color who are experiencing the brunt of the racism in America and who have been experiencing it for decades and are trying to get their way out. So I'm sorry to be a white voice added to this. I hope that's okay. I'm going to share three perspectives that are somewhat personal of mine. One is, if you've followed my channel, you know that I have two sons. Neither of my sons are completely white. My older son, Jonah, is half Puerto Rican. His father was definitely a brown man. He has deceased now, but we'll put a picture of him in here. And so, you know, I experienced issues of race and racism when I was with Jonah's father. And Jonah has experienced racism himself, even though he often is taken as a white person. And you know that Rafi is Black, and nobody's going to take him as a white person. He's clearly Black. And so I want to talk to you as the mother of children of color and what it means. And then I want to talk to you a little bit as somebody who has lived in Brazil, in Bahia, Brazil, which is one of the most African states in the country. And I was there studying issues of race and racism, among other things. And so that was a very powerful experience for me. And race in Brazil is very different, but still racist than America. And then the last thing I want to talk about, maybe the most important right now, is a little bit from my perspective as a social movement scholar. So I have a PhD in cultural anthropology, and my research was on social movements, particularly environmentalism as it related to race and activism and values of nature. But I've studied a fair bit. I'm not like the world's ultimate expert about how social movements evolve, and we are watching history right now. And I am calling on you all, no matter what your skin tone, to stand up and be part of that history, because that is how we make history effective. That is how we make social change effective. And it's happening right now in our country. And I want to give you some of my perspectives on that. So that's a lot, all right? First, I'm going to talk to you as a white mother of children of color. I have white privilege. White privilege is real, folks. It's real. And yet, I have lost a certain amount of my white privilege because my children aren't white. And I've lost the privilege to feel confident that my kids will be viewed for their actions and for themselves, as opposed to for the color of their skin. And I'm going to give you a really early example with Raphael when he was a baby, of me kind of being like, wow. And again, I've studied race long before I had children, either of my children. So this has always been a topic I've been interested in. I've always been aware of it. I've always been a white person against racism, even though I would argue that all white Americans are raised to be racist and we have to unpack it within ourselves. Not raised from my parents, but from my society to be racist. So when Rafi was a baby, and he was just a few months old, and we were in the Adirondacks in upstate New York, and I used to go to the Adirondacks every single summer of my life, and it's a very white place. Like, I had a very funny conversation once with somebody where we were talking about how white the Adirondacks were, and they were like, "Oh yeah, but honey, you remember I saw that Asian girl 2 weeks ago in town." Well, you know, if you have to point out that you saw an Asian girl 2 weeks ago in town, then you're in a pretty white place. So yeah, that's Rafi. So I walked into the video store where I was going to rent a DVD. This was back when you still rented DVDs, with Rafi in my arms, this adorable little black baby, and I was the only person in the store. And the woman there was rude as heck to me. She was just, I mean, she checked me out, but she was nasty and grumpy and glaring. And I got my DVD and I walked out on the sidewalk and I was like, oh my gosh, wow. I have no idea if that woman's pissiness, excuse my language, but you know, if she was so pissy because she had a migraine, or because her boyfriend broke up with her that morning, or because she just was always a pissy pain in the butt to everybody, or if she was being racist, you know, I had no idea. And it made me angry, it made me sad, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. This is what black folks have to go through every day of their lives. I mean, hopefully not every day, but you know, over and over and over again, of just these sort of microaggression moments where someone is not pleasant to them, a white person is not pleasant to them, and they have to wonder, is this because of my skin? You know, or is this have nothing to do with me? Is this about this person? You know, as a white person, we have the privilege to assume, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. That lady's got something up her butt. That's her problem, you know. When you're a person of color, you don't have that privilege. So, you know, I could talk so much more in depth and in pain about this, in the sense that I can't assume that my children will be viewed for their full potential. I can't assume that they will be safe when they interact with police. I can't assume that they can run freely through my neighborhood, which is majority white. I think about Tamir Rice a lot. Out of all the, you know, black people who have died at the hands of police, he was a boy. He was a boy. He was Rafi's age. He was in a park where children are supposed to play, and he was playing with a toy, and he was shot and killed by the police. And that just fills me with fear. And so I think that I'm a white woman with white privilege, but I don't have the ability or the power to extend all that white privilege to my children. You know, some examples of white privilege really ought to not be there, but we all, as parents, should feel safe sending our children into the world. You know, we all should feel that they are going to be judged by their character and their actions, not by their skin color. And I don't have that privilege anymore, and it's intense. It's very intense. So that is just something to say, that I'm aware of that, and that I would urge all of you to stand up. And the last piece I'm going to say about that, and then I am going to switch topics a little, is that white parents who have white children, they still need to teach their children about race and racism. They need to teach them about the dangers. They need to teach them, you know, they need to teach them so much, right? I mean, I, as a teenager, I did things, I drank a beer or two. I mean, I never drank a ton, but I drank a beer or two in high school. You know, I broke a law here and there. And I had the privilege as a white girl that even if I got caught, I would maybe just get slapped on the wrist and sent home. You know, it was not going to change the whole trajectory of my life and send me permanently into the criminal justice system. That's a privilege, you know. And so white parents need to teach their white children about race. They really, really do. Okay, so that's one thing. I could go on. I don't know how you all feel about this. If you have questions or thoughts or you want to hear more from me, please comment below. I want to talk to you a little bit about race and racism in Brazil when I lived there. Brazil's history of race is radically different than the US. Brazil had many slaves brought over from Africa. And the slave trade did not end until I believe it was 1852, and slavery did not end until 1888. And so, you know, there was actually more slaves of African descent in Brazil. Brazil has more people today with African ancestry, like immediate African ancestry in the past, 100, 200 years, than any country in the world except Nigeria. That means there's more people who are at least partially African in Brazil than most of the African countries. So that tells you something. But at the same time, Brazil never had Jim Crow. They never split things into black and white in the hard, fast way that America did. So people were intermarrying. There were black slave owners at certain points. There is a million gradations of notions of race in Brazil. So it's not black and white. It's like, oh, you're brown, oh, you're chocolate brown, oh, you're light brown, oh, you're dark brown, or you're this, or you're that. And there's a little of that in the African American community, but it's for the whole country in Brazil, and that's how people are seen. And the thing that's so different as a white person going down there, and this is, I'm talking first about before I had children, is that in Brazil, there's not the wall between black and white that we have here. And so individuals interact with you and you don't have to break down a wall. So it's almost like assumed that you're not racist to a certain extent until you show that you are. And so as a white person, it was actually easier to make friendships with black people there. And I remember after I lived in Brazil for over a year and I came back to the US and I lived in DC, which is where I'm from, and I'm walking down the street and, a black woman passes me and I look at her and I say, hi. And I just felt that like, there's a way in America that we are trained to see people by their race. And if that person is not your race, you don't look any deeper. Okay, whereas in Brazil, you're looking at somebody as an individual, and it was liberating, but there's still racism down there. I guess I don't know exactly where I'm going with this. It taught me how high and hard and fast the wall is in America between blacks and whites, and how hard it is to build meaningful relationships. Some of that wall has come down for me because I have children of color, but, and we see more and more multiracial families in America now. We're no longer as rare as we used to be, and that's important and valuable. But we have so far to go, okay? And I guess I could talk more about that. I don't know where to go with that. I do want to talk about social movements. We have not been to a single protest since this started, since the death of George Floyd. And that's very, very unusual for us. The only reason we haven't been to a protest is because of coronavirus. And we're actually going today to a small one in our suburban neighborhood. And Rafi's nervous about it. I know it's going to be fine. It's 1 o'clock. It's going to be peaceful, blah, blah, blah. But I'm I'm the person who normally I drag my kids to plenty of protests on multiple topics, not just race topics, but we've been to quite a number of Black Lives Matter protests. And in fact, there's one park on the west side of Atlanta where a lot of these events have happened. And Jonah, at one point, we were going back there for another, I don't even remember who it was, right? But we were going back there and he said, Mama, you know, we only come to this park when there's been a black man killed by a police officer. I'm like, you're right. That's when we come to this park, and we've been here enough that we know the park. So I want to say that for the people who are looking at the riots and the violence that's happened, first of all, we need to look at that. We need to unpack that before we jump to criticize it. We need to unpack it in various ways. First of all, some of the people causing violence are white folks. So in Nashville, they caught a guy who had tattoos on his arm about the 3%, which is a white nationalist, white supremacist group that talks about white revolution. And he was setting fire to multiple government buildings in Nashville and trying to blame it on the black protests. So there's actually been a lot of that. In Atlanta, there was a white woman who was an ally, and I think it's, you know, we could talk more about what it means to be a real ally, but she was an ally and she was at a protest and she was spraying Black Lives Matter. She was spray painting it on the side of a Starbucks. And a bunch of black folks came up to her and said, we need you to stop. Because guess who's going to get blamed for this? We're going to get blamed for this, not you. So we don't want you spray painting. We don't want you defacing property. That is not your right as a white activist, as a white ally, to do that at this time. You know, some of the people who are being violent out there or who are looting or stealing, they're opportunists. I mean, hey man, it's fun throwing bricks through windows. It's fun having an excuse and a reason to steal a giant TV from Target. You know, they're just opportunists, and you see that. You see black opportunists, white opportunists, anytime society's breaking down. There are some activists who are causing trouble, who are, maybe I shouldn't even put it that way, who are being violent towards property, you know, and I understand it. I don't support it. It's not what I want to do. It's not what I want to see my children doing. It's not what I want to see happening in my city, but I understand it. And people who say it has no place in all of this are wrong, because it does have a place. Because when activists start being, setting police cars on fire, then all of a sudden Colin Kaepernick taking a knee at a football game is like, sounds wonderful. You know, so Martin Luther King, first of all, he himself was nonviolent, but all his activism was engaging violence. Okay, his activism was about putting black people and their allies in danger so that the world could see the police violence enacted against them, or the violence from white people enacted against them. So there was still violence in his activism, even though he wasn't doing it. And that's important to realize. And it's also important to realize that he was viewed as a radical and pain in the neck. So many folks didn't like him. And it was the rise of folks like the Black Panthers and Malcolm X who made Martin Luther King seem like, oh, okay, he's the reasonable one. So that the white powers that be, all right, well, we'll meet with him because, you know, he's not bringing guns in here. He became the reasonable one. And so any social movement, when change actually happens, not just civil rights, but any social movement, there is a spectrum, all right? And the spectrum of activism has to get really large before the demands of the people in the middle start to be heard by society. And I am grateful that I feel like things are starting to be heard. And I would urge you to all stand up to do something. Make a phone call. Make a phone call to ask that that Confederate monument in your town be taken down. Make a phone call to say we need to have restructuring and reevaluation of the police. We need to have a systematic examination of the police force and racism and use of force. I am getting waves from behind. Are we going again?
Yep.
Okay. I'm really just going to do another minute or two here. I am talking from my heart. I want my channel to be a space where I can engage with everyone, regardless of your political beliefs. But this issue is far beyond politics at this point. This is about human decency. It's about understanding that all Americans should be treated equally. And I won't even get into immigrants and non-Americans, but yes, we should all be treated with the same respect, and we should all be given the same levels of safety in our society. And if we are paying and arming police officers, if we are paying for them with our local tax dollars and giving them weapons to walk around the streets, we need to make sure that they are protecting the safety of the whole community. And I know that there are many, many good police officers out there, and there are good police forces and good police commissioners and all of that. So I'm not denying that, but it is way beyond a bad egg situation of like one bad cop here, one bad cop there, one bad cop. You know, Eric Gardner was suffocated to death, and that was years ago, and that should have been the last person. So George Floyd should have never happened. And in case you're not aware, that the names rolling on the screen are black people who have been killed at the hands of police. I do feel that even if it's 5% of the police force or 10% of the police force or 2% of the police force that are racist and willing to use too much force, that requires a systematic uprooting of that, a systematic evaluation, and that people, you know, Derek, what's his name, who killed George Floyd, he had 12 strikes against him, 12 of excessive use of force against people of color, 12 before George Floyd, and he still had his job. That's not okay. We're paying his salary. People in Minnesota are paying his salary. It's not okay. So, y'all know this, and I'm just sorry if I'm on a soapbox. I have been awake at 2 and 3 in the morning about this, because this is about the future safety of my children and my society. And thank you for listening. Please spread some kindness. Please speak up against racism. Speak up against racism somewhere, somehow this week, please. All right. Thank you so much. See y'all real soon.